Well, thanks very much, folks, for being here today. On my immediate right is Charles Benoit. Charles is the co-owner of the Toronto Distillery Company, and he's also president of the Ontario Craft Distillers Association. And on my left is Don DiMonte, which is DIMonte. He's the owner of Last Straw Distillery, which is in Vaughan, just got its license, and he's the secretary of the Ontario Craft Distillers Association. And here to talk about my private member's bill, Free My Rye. Look, I'll tell you a quick story where this came from, and then Charles will say a few words and happy to take questions that you have. So I actually Deb and I had one of the local winery owners and his wife over for dinner, and they told the story about how they wanted to have actually Dillon's, which is a distillery in my riding, to have them come over to sell their gin at his restaurant. And then he found out this ridiculous rule that even though they're 5 minutes apart, the gin had to go all the way to Toronto, sit in a warehouse for months, and then be shipped right past the distillery again to the winery restaurant. And meanwhile, it's marked up through the roof. So it's expensive, and it's a real pain to try to get the product there. So this is crazy. So I looked into it. And I think credit goes where credit is due. The current government and the previous PC government have done some very good things to help out VQA wineries and craft breweries. And as a result, we got a lot more of them and a lot more jobs created in spin-offs in agriculture. But somehow when it comes to public policy in Ontario, if alcohol is in beer or wine, it's a good thing and you promote it. But when it goes into gin or rye, suddenly it's a bad thing and public policy works against it. And I remember back in January, the lawyer for the LCBO actually said during a court hearing, it's the government's policy not to support the proliferation of distilleries in Ontario. I mean, that makes no sense. So I said, okay, what have we done for small wineries and craft brewers that we can also give to distilleries to help them grow, to create jobs, and give consumers more points of access? So my bill really has 4 points. First, it takes down the steep tax burden for small batches. So the companies in the industry can then reinvest, produce more product, and hire more people. Second, it allows for direct delivery, so you can actually take the product directly to a restaurant, a bar, or a customer, and you eliminate the middleman and save costs. Third, sell by the glass. Like, it's crazy. I mean, you go into a brewery, you can have a glass of beer. You go to a winery, you have a glass of wine. But you go into the Toronto Distillery Company, you can't have a mixed drink. That's nuts. So allow for sale by the glass. And fourth and finally, the government is at least taking steps to opening up more points of access for beer and wine through grocery stores. So the bill would call for a similar increase in points of sale for spirits. So a 20% increase over the next 5 years in places where I can go and buy Ontario-made rye, gin, or rum. So I'll leave it at that. And Charles, you want to say a few words from the businesses and the association's perspective?
Yeah, well, we're incredibly optimistic. This is a well-worn path. We've seen, again, the province has done wonderful things for the craft brewery sector, and look at the progress we've seen. And so we're extremely excited about the future for craft distilling in Ontario. We've seen what British Columbia has done. They've really taken off. So with the Free My Rye Act and the kind of changes that are in that bill, we're going to see the same kind of, and hopefully even bigger and better, because we are Ontario, growth and takeoff in small-scale distilling in the province.
Oh, nice and short. You got no future in politics, Charles. It's too short. Happy to take any questions for Charles or Don or myself.
Where is the bill now? I've lost track. Did it get second reading?
No, not yet, Fergie. So it was introduced in May. I did a previous version that I used for consultation and improved it. So the Free My Rye Act was introduced in mid-May, and we'll see when the lottery is for next aspects. But if I have to go through that process, I will. But I hope this will be a pressure point. I mean, there has been some progress made for wine and beer, and why not do the same for distilleries? When similar reforms were brought into the States, they went from 50 distilleries to almost 1,000 within a decade. And that's incredible, and it shows what kind of potential there is in the marketplace. So let's do the same in Ontario.
Where would these increased points of sale be? Because I don't know if they're ready to go to spirits in the grocery stores. Or is that what you'd like to see? Do you want to see it alongside the other products?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I have no problem with that, but I know the government does. So the bill leaves wide open how they could achieve that 20% increase. So whether it's through more points of sale through an LCBO agency stores, whether it's grocery stores, I think a lot of people in Ontario would say, look, if somebody wants to open up a Scotch store or a whiskey store or an independent spirit store, all the power to them.
To just
Yeah, at least it,
outside of their own distillery site, actually
Exactly.
be able to sell in a, set up on Yonge Street or whatever and have it.
you got it. So it mandates the LCBO within 5 years it have to increase number of points of sale by 20%. I leave it up to the government of the day to figure out how to do that.
You mentioned the work the government's doing to open up wine sales and beer sales in grocery stores and other like points of access. Why do you think spirits have been left out of that thus far?
I'll have actually Charles and Don will have a viewpoint on this, and they could probably talk a bit about the ridiculous rules that still exist from really a Victorian era when it comes to spirits. But somehow when it comes to public policy, you know, alcohol that comes from grapes or alcohol that comes from beer, hops,
Grains.
grains.
Cereal
All right. So let me rephrase that because I got lost in my science there. So alcohol that comes from grapes or alcohol that comes from grain in beer is a good thing. We should support it. But alcohol comes from grain in spirit, somehow that's a bad thing. And we have to throw up obstacles. I just think it reflects an outdated era, and it's time to drag the LCBO and the regulators kicking and screaming in the 21st century.
Yeah, I'd add. I think it's small scale distilling is a relatively recent phenomenon. You know, it used to be that you needed millions of dollars to get into this business, but I think what started maybe about 15 years ago is there was a growth in the supplier side. So now all of a sudden there's more manufacturers making stills, and when some jurisdictions, notably in the West Coast of the U.S., started to loosen up their own laws because they had the concentration of already small-scale brewers and a lot of vineyards, that led to an ecosystem of small-scale distilling furthering like this whole supplier network. And then now you've got people taking advantage of this new supplier network of equipment for small-scale distilling. And then and now you've got people agitating here in Ontario saying, well, okay, so we can see how this business now functions in other jurisdictions. So hopefully with some, again, well-worn changes that have already happened for wine and beer, we can see the same thing happen for spirits. But 30 years ago, there weren't any small-scale distilleries to ask for these changes in the first place. So I think that's one of the reasons why this is happening now and not earlier.
Yeah, it reminds me of where the VQA wineries were 20 years ago and craft brewers were 10 years ago. And if we want to create the same number of jobs, and the spin-offs in agriculture, mind you, are significant. Currently, distilleries are the fourth largest purchaser of grains in the province of Ontario. You allow this to expand, there's even more jobs in farming.
How many small distilleries are there now?
Right about a couple dozen in various stages of development. So there's no question it's taking off, and again, it's because it's never been easier to start a business like that. But I think you have to compare it to, say, British Columbia, where they've got over 50 distilleries and a fraction of our population. But because they've had for a couple of years now graduated markup, just like Free My Rye Act will do, that it actually, you can really afford to invest in a small distillery like you can't in Ontario right now.
Right. How many distilleries are actually, like yours, are actually open and selling?
Well, we've got 15 members in our association, that are open and operating.
You want to talk a bit about Last Straw?
Well, we're opening up in Vaughan. We moved from Hillsburg in Wellington County to Vaughan because we needed to get a retail space, so we needed to be somewhere that was more accessible for people to get to us. And plus, we live in Vaughan, so it's nice to be home and near home when you're working. I've got partners, I've got family involved. 2 of my sons are involved. My youngest one is actually doing most of the distilling now. He's developed a gin that we're releasing when we launch. And yeah, it's been a fun ride. And we're not called Last Straw for any other reason other than it's a taxing thing to try and get a distillery going. But we're there.
When do you think it'll open?
We're launching August 6th and 7th.
Oh, okay.
You know, it might be interesting, Charles, too, if you describe the different level of taxation on spirits compared to wine and beer.
Sure. So the big takeaway is if you buy a bottle that's $26.85 in the LCBO, $6 and change went to the supplier. So that's pretty staggering. If for brewers, on the first 50,000 hectoliters they brew, they pay a fractional tax. For Ontario wine growers, they actually don't pay any excise tax, so that's really nice. But for spirits, there's nothing like that. So it really is. If you don't have massive economies of scale, you can't function, you can't thrive. We have a spirit we're super proud of. We distilled it entirely from sugar beets. It's like tremendously earthy. It's promised not like anything you've ever had before in your life. And it was actually, it's on, it was Toronto Life's Holiday Gift Giving Guide. It's won all sorts of awards. And, but if we were to sell it through the LCBO with their fixed 140% markup right now, it'd end up being a bottle well north of $50. Probably we have to charge $70 to have like a break-even price, we just don't want to do that. We just don't want to do that. We don't have a bottle that expensive. So we sell it exclusively out of our store, and we export it to Washington, D.C., where for a retail price of about $30 US, we get paid about $16 US. So it's a much more versus getting maybe say 12 Canadian for a retail price of 40, 45 Canadian. So you can see the difference.
So sorry, I might have missed a number in there somewhere. So what do you sell, say, the bottle of gin there, what do you sell that for in your store?
So the gin is $39.95.
$39.95. But if you sold it at the LCBO...
No, it's so currently right now this is one of the things that would change with the Act, is that the same 140% the LCBO applies in their store. And keep in mind that 140% is there, and it's designed to cover their distribution and retail costs. So they take that same 140% and they actually apply it to our own retail stores. And that is particularly crushing, because when it works out to be, when you apply that against our stores, it's pure tax, right? I mean, they're not doing any work of distribution or retail, and it's about half the bottle cost.
So what else are you going to make, Don, other than gin?
We're releasing an aged moonshine. We've aged it for 1 year in a Jack Daniels barrel.
Oh, yeah?
And it's moonshine because it's corn and sugar, so the sugar takes it out of being a whiskey. We're releasing a blackstrap molasses spirit. We're aging some to become a rum, but we're releasing some just as a white.
Yeah.
And we're releasing a gin.
What's the deal about your gin? Or is it that, like, the Colonel's secret recipe of 11 herbs and spices, and you're not going to tell me?
Well, I don't honestly know, because my son did all the development for it. He developed a bunch of samples, and we went through them. We had some crowdsourcing, people trying them, and they all voted. And they picked his, I think we call it Gin 21.
So 21.
It was his number 21. 21 was just the number in the line of recipes he'd made.
All right. Cool.
Jim, what's happened to you since the 2014 election? I mean, you were this surly guy threatening to fire 100,000 people, and now you're like this fun-loving guy who's going to free your rye, and you've got a talk radio show. I mean, is this the real you, or was the 2014? I mean, you'd be premier now if you'd acted like this during the
If I would
election.
come forward with some rye and some whiskey and some booze on the table, eh? Well, look, these. Well, look, I mean, I obviously had to put forward a plan for the province as a whole, and I stand by that plan. And I often tell people the only time you should truly believe a politician is when they're telling you things you don't want to hear. But this also now gives me a chance to move some ideas forward that I've always had. And to do so as proud member, so it's been fun. Do you listen to the radio show?
Of course.
There you go.
When you were the leader, I remember the great advisor, Randy Rath, convinced you that bucket beer would be a good
There you
idea
go.
for Ontario.
That's true.
But then you backed off that and didn't put it in your platform. Do you think you'd be premier enough if you'd stuck to the booze is clearly an issue for you.
Many people would agree that the booze has been an issue for me for many years, and particularly my family. Well, look, I mean, I've always been somebody who believes in the reform. This gives me a chance to push it forward. And what was really eye-opening, too, is a story that I told that that you couldn't actually move a bottle of gin 5 kilometers down the road for sale. So I wanted to free this stuff up. But yeah, I mean, it's been fun, and it's a bit more relaxing, I guess, when you're not constantly in the spotlight. Do you think I get another go sometime down the road, Bliss?
I'm going to bail you out on those kind of
Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
So because we got some advice from the Star Bureau on all that stuff too, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut on that. How do you get I'm not sure the process, like, how do you get this to second reading? Does the government,
Yeah.
is that negotiated by House leaders?
Well, so there'll be a new lottery that'll come up once we get through the current private members bills list, and then you get a lottery number, and you can trade your number up and down for a second reading. So there's no,
So it's like drawing straws.
yeah, because I did my private members bill back in the spring on the act around. Sorry, why am I slipping my mind here? We did the act around the growing anti-Jewish and anti-Israeli sentiment in the province, right? So that was important for me to talk about that. And this was another one that I've been working on, and Charles helped me write the bill. So to answer your question, so there's no particular date yet because we've got to do another round.
Right.
But I really think, like, the door's now open.
Crapshoot whether this will get to second reading or not.
I hope they look. I hope they steal some of these things. The door's now been open, right? The government has moved forward in small steps on freeing up beer and wine, and I think the response has been very positive. So a lot of us in Niagara say, "Great, we've got one grocery store now where I can drive to buy beer or wine." So hopefully, this is what the government's appetite to move farther. I actually think a lot of these ideas in here, they'll adapt. They make a lot of sense.
Do you think they're just waiting to get the beer and wine out of the way, that they have enough
No,
to
I
chew
think
on
that-
right now,
I
and
think
they're
there's a bit of
worried
a-
about moving too fast and scaring some people?
I think they're showing a bit of a dated view on where people are when it comes to spirits, and I sense that unlike 20 years ago, people don't get all worked up about having a rye or a vodka. So I do believe that public sentiment will be on side to do more for the distilleries. Like, not too long ago, there was a couple. Now there are, you said, 16 in the association. We've seen it in British Columbia where they've exploded the states. I just think that consumers are moving more in this direction. There's a younger crowd, too, that is more interested. My guess, if it's my bill that passes eventually, great. My guess is the government's going to catch on to this pretty soon. They should.
Is there an appetite in the public opinion to sell hard liquor or alcohol in that format in a store, or is that just one step too far? We can understand beer being sold in stores, there's an appetite for that, we understand there's an appetite for wine. But to sell, even though it's a Ontario-made liquor, do you think that it's taking it too far?
I think the government would actually be surprised that people would support that. I like the notion. A couple summers ago, Deb and I went down to Massachusetts for a getaway. And I walked into a store, and believe it or not, they had beer and wine and spirits, and I could purchase what I wanted as long as I was of age. I didn't get shot. There were no riots happening in the parking lot. Everything worked out just fine. I survived, and I'm here today. I think more people are moving in that direction. I also work in the realm of realism. The government's already said no to that for the time being. So let's look for other outlets then. As long as we get 20% more points of access, just like we're doing for beer and wine, I think people would be pretty happy with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe one question in French?
Oh
Is there anyone who
man,
speaks French?
Benoit's French.
Benoît?
Ouais.
Ok. Donc, en fait, juste peut-être pour nos auditeurs francophones, pouvez-vous dire pourquoi vous êtes là aujourd'hui?
Je suis ici aujourd'hui parce que je suis beaucoup d'optimisme pour l'industrie. J'aimerais beaucoup si les mêmes choses qui arrivaient déjà dans Colombie-Britannique, dans les États-Unis, peut arriver ici en Ontario aussi. Et je pense que la meilleure façon pour faire ça, c'est que Free My Rye devient la loi.
Pourquoi il y a autant de réticence, autant de bâtons dans les roues ici en Ontario par rapport aux autres provinces?
C'est une bonne question, probablement beaucoup de raisons, mais Ontario c'est beaucoup plus gros, alors mais c'est une bonne question, franchement. Ontario, c'est vrai qu'ils doivent être un peu plus prudents parce que plus qu'une fois dans les années 1990, ils étaient avaient des problèmes et des issues avec des obligations internationales. Alors, c'est vrai, une de ces raisons est que Ontario avait eu cet problème, mais ça fait longtemps et je crois encore parce que comme on voit l'État de New York juste à côté a déjà fait une farm distillery là et des autres provinces. Alors j'espère qu'Ontario probablement dans l'année prochaine on va voir quelque chose.
Peut-être une dernière question.
Bien sûr.
Pouvez-vous réexpliquer un peu le concept des taxes? Donc, vous êtes surtaxé pour les spirits, pour les alcools forts, c'est ça?
C'est ça, exactement. Les taxes sont beaucoup plus hauts que les taxes sur bière et vin. Alors, si on vendrait une bouteille de gin, le LCBO pour $40, le parti de cette $40 qui va à la distillerie, c'est environ $12. Alors, c'est très, très haut, beaucoup plus que vin et taxes. Et il n'y a rien dans le loi en ce moment pour les petites distilleries. Alors, c'est très, très dur si vous n'êtes pas une grosse organisation. Okay.
Super. Folks, thanks very much. Really appreciate your attendance here today.
Thank you.
Charles, Don, thank you. Good job, guys. Great French, too.